A seeming human being obsessed with golf breaks into a golf course where he gets hunted by demonic hostile walking corpses as if his conscience torments him for killing them. Throughout his ambiguous journey, he needs to evade these hostile entities while golfing, as nothing can get in his way for wanting to golf. As he intimidates the security and continues to golf in the dead of night in absolute darkness, he reaches the main office where he finds the corpses of a few people when he eventually meets an Eldritch God who has seemingly given him his existence and his purpose. Right off the bat, we are prompted to choose the body of our protagonist, having a range of skin color tones. This might seem like a generic character customization feature, but the fact that the instruction is to choose a body indicates something far more sinister about our protagonist. Keep this in mind as more hints and clues later in the game makes this point stand out. Arriving at the Green Canyon Golf Club, the protagonist notices a white van with the label Greener Grass Lawn Care Specialist, seemingly a lawn care company hired to take care of the grass in the golf course. Something interesting to note, every time I try to leave the map, instead of having a bland invisible wall, the protagonist gets stopped by hundreds of writings depicting his internal thoughts or what he's been programmed to believe, that golf is his absolute passion in life and there's nothing else that he can do or would do other than golf. Trying to go into the golf course, the doors are locked where the protagonist gets urged to jump the fence, which he casually adheres to and jumps the fence, revealing to us that he's a trespasser and not a member of the club. To say the least, the golf course is simply breathtaking, being in a canyon which opened in 1982, bought by rich investors, being developed to such space rather than being open space. Casually golfing being a trespasser, as the ball enters the waters, a voice instructs the protagonist that the ball cannot enter the waters, as it's a special ball, something the protagonist carries with him. As the sun slowly goes down, getting darker and darker,
"Hey, the course is closed."
The protagonist gets approached by an attendant, telling him off that the course is closed and he cannot be there any longer.
"Well, it is, so you should get going."
The protagonist menacingly getting too close for comfort to the attendant, being very intimidating. It scares the attendant, who clears his throat and simply informs the protagonist that he's going home, being too scared to escort the protagonist off the course.
I'm getting out of here. Don't break anything."
It's not clear why the attendant gets so scared and worried to the point of letting the protagonist carry on with his crazed journey of playing golf in absolute darkness, but the closer he got to him, the more terrified the attendant became. Continuing on to play golf, the sun fully goes down with a full moon barely lighting up the dark golf course. The mindless protagonist keeps on playing until he finds a corpse by a hole, who has his mouth split open into a horrifying smile. Taking a closer look, it's clear it is the same attendant that told the protagonist to leave and then got terrified, depicting he died as a direct consequence of crossing the protagonist. Is it possible the protagonist has a split personality and doesn't know when he kills people? Or has someone else been committing such a heinous crime, making the protagonist believe that he is the culprit? Despite being such a grim sight, with the corpse even being mutilated, the protagonist comfortably carries on golfing and even cleaning the bloodied golf ball, not batting an eye, as if he is completely used to such scenes, which in a way depicts that maybe he's used to a split personality committing the murders, or that he is the one knowingly committing them yet being indifferent to the murders. On his way to the next hole, he comes across a shed where he finds a note written by one of the golf club managers trying to find a grass servicing company when they stumble upon the Greener Grass, which we found the white van of at the front. The note lists pros and cons of several companies, with Greener Grass specializing in remote areas but having two cons of not having many reviews and having a really bizarre ad. Nonetheless, Green Canyon Golf Club having no other choice, they go with them. The protagonist soon finds the company's poster as well, being of three different guys, one being bald, one blonde, and the other brunette. In hole 6, I try to check a mechanic of the game, walking the protagonist into the waters, with a strange text appearing saying that this body cannot swim, referring to the protagonist. This goes back to the intro where we could choose the skin color of the protagonist, yet again being referred to as the body, which starts to create a pattern that the protagonist might not be a typical human being, but something that can be synthesized or something that is unhuman. Again, much more on this later on. In hole number 8, as the protagonist hits the ball, a mysterious man with radiant glowing white eyes comes out of the bushes, simply staring at him without saying a word. On a closer inspection, it's one of the employees at the greener grass, seen on the poster, the brunette guy, who similarly to the attendant has his mouth ripped open, having a terrifying grin. The protagonist gets instructed to look but not stare, as this horrifying walking corpse can only move when the protagonist doesn't look. Also, staring for too long without looking away or getting too close gets this corpse to attack the protagonist and kill him in a grisly manner. It gets a little difficult here to golf while making sure we don't look away too long for this enemy to rip the protagonist to pieces. The best technique I found to do while playing is to lure this enemy forward, which means while hitting the ball being in the line of sight, so not out of the sight of the protagonist, which makes him stop in his track. After putting the ball in the hole, this undead corpse runs away, rightfully confusing me. Just after evading this entity and continuing on, the protagonist gets approached by a concerned member of the golf club, telling the protagonist to leave the course as something bad is happening, genuinely caring about the protagonist. Nonetheless, the protagonist is not pleased and wants to continue playing. Continuing on, the protagonist gets attacked by another greener grass employee whom he evades temporarily by repeating what he did before, looking at them long enough to keep them stationary in their place. Soon, he gets followed by 2 of the employees at the same time, making it hard to golf. Nonetheless, a determined protagonist lets nothing stand in his way of playing golf, even if it means being hunted by terrifying hostile undead corpses, being a life or death situation. Finally, at hole number 12, the protagonist is hunted by the 3rd member of the greener grass company, the bald-headed man. After evading them and going to the caddy house, he witnesses how empty and dark it is. Going to what seems to be the meeting room, he witnesses how the golf club member who warned him of this place is shot dead in the head and with another corpse charred to a crisp. If the protagonist has been the culprit behind all the murders, how he could have possibly gotten to this place before to kill these people? Could it be possible someone else is involved? Going to the shadows, the protagonist enters a surreal alternate dimension where he is in absolute darkness with a golf ball only lighting his path and keeping his sanity amongst so many monstrous beings, and with a very familiar grim smile found on the corpses. There's a sacrificial bed with one of the club members on, with his blood powering the golf ball. The surreal forest is packed with static yet moving mannequins who express different emotions and madness. Things take a very surreal and twisted turn when the protagonist gets instructed to pop blisters found on tree barks and kill trees by putting the balls in the hollows, being protected in guarded pyramid temples. After each time, the vision of an Eldritch God appears, trying to dishearten and dissuade the protagonist from continuing on, as there's no hope fighting against the god who is powerful and that the protagonist should join him, as if implying the protagonist has been trying to defeat this god ever since the beginning, playing golf. Through the sacrifice of people and their blood, it seems this golf ball becomes powerful, a weapon the protagonist can use to defeat this god. The second encounter with this god reveals that the protagonist is wearing a human suit, going back to the hints that a skin was selected for him and that his body cannot swim. This god then explains that he will take the protagonist's dinner from him and that this world will not be his. In a battle against this gigantic god, the protagonist manages to defeat him by hitting him with glowing balls grown on a certain tree, which he then teleports back to the real world and drives away like a normal human being. Throughout the game, there are hints that the protagonist is not a human being, but an entity that wears a suit to blend in with humans and look human. That's why the attendant becomes horrified when the protagonist approaches him, as the attendant can see up close the oddities and abnormal unhuman details of the protagonist. He also keeps referring to himself as a buddy, saying that the buddy cannot swim and that he needs to choose one before going to the golf course. Finally, facing off the Eldritch God, he first doesn't recognize him, but eventually, when the protagonist overcomes many challenges, he soon learns the protagonist is almost as powerful as himself, who uses human skins to blend in and as a disguise. Therefore, it's clear by now that the protagonist is an Eldritch God himself, up to par as the final boss the protagonist faces, and someone who seemingly eats human beings. Hence why the Eldritch God says to him that he will take his dinner from him. That's why when the protagonist is attacked by the corpses, his face gets ripped open, as that's the way this liquid-like entity can lose its control over his human suits. But why is this powerful entity in the golf course anyway, and what is his purpose? It's depicted that the protagonist is obsessed with golf, and when I try to leave the maps, invisible barriers formed with hundreds of writings of how obsessed the protagonist is with golfing. This is later revealed that the protagonist wants to kill an Eldritch God in order to take over the power and rule over this world as mentioned by the Eldritch God himself and have probably unlimited dinner, meaning human beings. His obsession with golf is that it seems somehow he can concentrate his powers into golf balls and defeat this god. We see in the alternate world how the protagonist sacrifices some people and uses their blood to charge up the power of the golf balls to fight off the final boss. The gigantic Eldritch God we face seems to be powered by nature. That's why his domain is in the Green Canyon where the golf course was developed in, and the final stage is when the protagonist destroys the blisters on trees and shoots balls into tree hollows, effectively weakening the roots of the Eldritch God to this world. In his main domain where the protagonist faces him, there is also a large tree containing glowing orbs which are extremely powerful to the point that the protagonist can use and take the flesh off the Eldritch God. Now, the corpses we face in the game come in two different manners. The ones who attack the protagonist and the ones who are motionless. The motionless corpses warn the protagonist to leave the course and soon die. You might think the protagonist must have been the culprit, especially as he intimidated them. However, one thing they share with the other corpses who attack the protagonist is their slit-open grins. Therefore, the way they died was in the same fashion by someone who kills them as such. Accordingly, the ones who attack the protagonist are the members of the Greener Grass Company, who had a very bizarre ad and specialized on remote locations, as if being an organization specifically designed for the Green Canyon golf course. Therefore, it seems that they were all minions of the Eldritch God we face at the end to do his bidding for him. They killed many people in the golf course to accommodate the Eldritch God in the place, and they pollinated the field, seemingly to empower this Eldritch God and create a flourishing place for him. Hence why the strange behavior they have and their intentions of stopping and killing the protagonist from progressing. Indeed, a very weird game, but with a kind of deep story. Anyway, have a fantastic day.